Firstly, a huge and very warm welcome to everybody who's joining the webinar today. Thank you very much for your time, for taking out your time, whether it's your afternoon in the UK, hello, fellow Brits, or if you're over on the East Coast or if you're on the West Coast, then it's very early, and thank you for taking the time and getting up so early for this. We have 30 minutes today, so we have a lot to pack in. We're going to do a very brief introduction, and then we're going to drop into talking about localization maturity. So this is the third in our series of multimedia localization maturity. And for those of you that I can see that were on the last webinar that we had with Lilt, we were talking about the very early stages of localization maturity, so reactive, and then perhaps moving out of reactive into sort of more repeatable embedded processes. What we're really talking about today is the later stages of localization multimedia maturity. So what organizations can look for, how they can accelerate their localization to really those sort of more mature levels of the model. I am joined today by David over at Phrase. I'm really super excited to have David on the call. David, I'll just pass over to you for a brief introduction.
Thank you so much for inviting Phrase and me personally onto the call. I am one of the solution architects at Phrase, so I work with our customers who are transitioning into the platform or adopting a translation management system or other language technology for the first time, and help guide them through the process and understanding their tools and options that are available to them.
Great, thank you. And we've been working with Phrase as a tech partner now for the best part of 5 years, closely integrated with the Phrase technology, and we'll be talking about that today and showing the audience, on the viewers for the webinar, on what that looks like. So, as I say, we've been working with Phrase for the best part of 5 years. Phrase, historically, we were partnered with Phrase's sort of previous brand with MemSource, and that's gone through a fairly radical rebranding in the last 12 months, and with the purchase of your string technology sister company, which is now all under the one moniker underneath of Phrase. So hugely exciting. David, tell us a little bit about Phrase as a company and what it's in the market to solve and help people do.
Phrase is a language technology company, and the objective is to unlock an organization's potential by unlocking language. So providing the technologies that will remove the barriers to communicating with people in other markets, whether they're in your same country, that you have a multilingual audience to support, or internationally across a broad variety of types of content. Whether it's internal content, external content, application development, websites, marketing, all those things are addressable by our technology solutions.
Amazing. And just for the viewers, I mean, what sort of organization? We can see, the big names on here are the Ubers, the Shopifys, the large enterprises, which is certainly where CaptionHub spends most of its time as a business and as a technology solution. Are you very much focused on the enterprise, on the sort of on the larger organizations, or are you fairly agnostic with who you work with?
The enterprise is a very important space for us because those are the places that have typically the most need for technology to help drive productivity and to accelerate the time to market. Very, very important. That said, we do work with smaller organizations who have a need to manage their language assets, to manage their language translation process. So this is a set of technology that really does span from the smaller organizations up to the largest in the world. But certainly, as you look at the productivity gains that are needed, enterprise is sort of the place to look to for the core requirements that we want to drive.
Yeah, and we'll be coming on to those, what we see as those sort of problem sets that we see in that complexity of scale during this webinar. And so for those of you who are new to CaptionHub, I'm just going to do a super brief introduction here because I can see many of the attendees are CaptionHub customers or regular attendees to these webinars. CaptionHub is a subtitling and multimedia localization platform. We've been in existence since 2015, focused on enterprise, and we essentially bring together best of AI tools, collaboration tools, and then best in localization tech. So those sort of three core pillars to help our customers run their subtitling at the scale at which they need to run it. So let's jump into the webinar itself and talk about what we're here to talk about today, which is localization maturity with a focus on multimedia. So as many of you know who are tuning in to this webinar series about localization maturity, we're running this series across the entire localization model. So running from reactive and repeatable, those very early stages, to a more managed set of processes, and then through to optimized and transparent localization maturity. And so last week and the week before, in the previous two webinars, we looked at reactive, which is as an organization just entering some form of localization and really getting to grips with all of the potential possibilities there. And it's a very new world for even some of the larger organizations, David, that we're working with. And we find some pretty huge enterprises that are just starting to enter that localization conversation. So as I say, last week we looked at moving from a reactive state of localization to getting some repeatable processes in place. But what we're here really to talk about today is really going beyond that and having a managed, embedded, and really optimized set of localization processes. And this is where we start to see organizations bring in technologies, multiple vendors, and have those technologies work together in coherence to deliver localization really as its own business unit in organizations. And so I'm going to pass over to David now and just sort of initially ask you a couple of questions, David, around the localization. You've given us an overview of Phrase and some of the industries that you operate in, the space that you're operating in. For those on the call who are particularly new to what a TMS is, I wonder if you can sort of start from the very start and just give us a brief overview of what is a TMS. What could viewers really expect as they're taking their sort of first bite of the TMS cherry, as it were? Sort of moving into having multiple technologies can be a little bit overwhelming for organizations and new teams. And really just sort of, let's open that conversation up. I'll pass it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. So at the most basic, a translation management system is the tool that is going to help you manage the process that's been defined, to make it repeatable and executable by the people who need to repeat and execute throughout the organization, but also bring the various language technologies that are in play sort of under one roof. There's a lot of technology that's integrated into a translation management system to help drive the process, to drive translation, to drive scale and reusability, and to drive quality. And those will be managed essentially from a single pane of glass from a translation management system. So I'm sorry, go ahead, James.
I think you're probably going to answer my question, but I was going to ask what are some of those embedded technologies? Because for us, CaptionHub it wouldn't be the tool that it is without all of the embedded technologies, both natively and partner technologies that it works with. So we see ourselves as part of a technology stack in localization and video production. And it's really important that we play nicely with technologies like, for instance, Phrase. So I'm just wondering how you sort of think about the technologies that sit inside the Phrase platform.
Well, the first layer, the beating heart, is the workflow engine, is being able to take a piece of content that's been submitted for translation to drive the process correctly. Who needs to be involved, what tools need to be involved, and make sure that happens and there's visibility into that process. And then we start to layer in the other tools that drive productivity and manage quality. So things like translation memory, right? Being able to take translations that have been previously approved and paid for, obviously, and put them into the right place and reuse them when the same kind of content is being run through for translation, so that you save time and you save expense. being able to bring in term bases so that there's consistency in terminology throughout all of the content that's being translated, being able to integrate with the machine translation technology that I'm sure everybody wants to talk about, because AI is the topic. We can't talk about anything else right now. And then on top of that, having that visibility through reporting and analytics so that you can really effectively manage a repeatable localization program across all kinds of different content through the organization.
And so let's take one organizational profile, which is large enterprise, we're doing more and more localization. It's not embedded as a full unit or BAU unit. Perhaps it's a team of 2 or 3 people, and it's starting to get to the point where it needs to invest in 2 or 3 different technologies. And it's looking at the TMS market. It sort of knows it's there. Maybe it's hired somebody into the team that's got a localization background and saying, yes, we need to have a TMS. We're in 2023, the market is moving, the technologies, there is consolidation. What are some of the things that those companies should be looking for and thinking about? I guess as those companies are looking at technologies and building out their RFPs, what are the key sort of game changers that they would be looking to bring into the business with a TMS like Phrase?
So I think one of the key criteria that honestly gets overlooked is being able to map and adjust to your actual business process, rather than a tool coming in saying, this is the way you're going to do translations, and it has to be one of these 5 predefined steps. You want to be able to have some flexibility because every organization has some uniqueness. So in that workflow engine, in the orchestration with different tools with which you need to integrate, you want to look at that. Some of those will be prepackaged options. So for example, in our case, Phrase and CaptionHub already have that integration done.
Yeah.
So what are the other sources of content that you need to drive to a translation process? And if there's not something that's prepackaged, how easy is it to integrate something on your own or with a little bit of assistance?
And these organizations coming in and looking at those criteria, that they will also have the really enjoyable job of putting that into a business case to get that budget signed off and say, look, we really need this to ensure we hit our business goals of translating this amount of content accurately in these number of languages within a 7-day period. We need to buy Phrase. It works really well with CaptionHub. What are some of the ROI metrics that they will be having to think about? And is there a way that Phrase can help with that ROI and that building out the business case?
There's a lot of great discussion around ROI in the industry.
There always is, right? Particularly in enterprise.
So much fun.
Yeah.
So ROI is going to be sliceable from a lot of different angles. One of the key metrics that is surfaced in our platform is turnaround time, being able to see how quickly things are getting done, being able to see your volumes, being able to see quality scoring inside of the platform so that we can say, yes, this was a good translation, or no, we had some issues with this, it needs to be adjusted, and being able to over time say, yes, this is good, we're getting the results from it that we expect. Or yeah, we need to do some work on our own processes or how we're applying technology or introducing some other things into the mix to be able to drive that. So defining ROI in terms of throughput is very easy. I really like to look at market accessibility and being able to tie back to a business value proposition of, we're doing this so that we can expand into X market, and that's never taken lightly. Someone somewhere has a revenue objective for that. So how do we help achieve that revenue objective or that cost constraining objective, or any of those things that the key decision makers at the larger viewpoints of the office are going to say, yeah, this is really helping us move the business forward and tap into these markets that we want to address in order to better serve an existing customer base or to acquire a new customer base.
And what if we're looking at the sort of the enterprise timeline, which, as we know, can massively vary. So it's a bit of a tricky question. But if a company is embedding phrase, what sort of period are they looking at to start seeing the return on their investment? Well, I suppose actually, sorry, two questions. The first is, how long does it take to start getting embedded processes in place with phrase, and then the return on investment? What's the sort of window of opportunity there for the viewers on the webinar?
Depending on where you are today, it can be a matter of weeks. It could be a matter of months. Again, it kind of ties back to how you define ROI.
Yeah.
If you have nothing in place today, as long as we can effectively define what the process needs to be, pull that in, do the integration. In the case of CaptionHub, that's a very fast deployment because the integration is already there. There's not a complex workflow that has to be defined from scratch. We know the captions have been created, they've been approved, they need to be translated, and then reviewed, approved, whatever those steps are. So once those steps are defined, they can be captured in phrase, executed, and then we can start getting that value. Where you get that quicker return is how much technology do you want to leverage in the actual translation effort? Are we going to have something that is strictly done by machine translation tools? I'm not saying that's a good idea, but that's the fastest way to get translation back in and to have it available for publishing. How much human review do you want to have before you deploy a translation, or do you want to have something that is completely human translated? All those scenarios are what you have to work out in advance and are all supportable by the technology. So once those decisions are made, the technology falls into place very, very quickly.
So we're going to dig into the technology now, and it'd be a really good point to jump into the product, just for those on the call that haven't seen the products working together. And we can do a relatively sort of quick demo of the workflow there. Just got one question that's come through the Q&A. And by the way, I didn't say at the start of the call, but anybody that has a question, please do put it into the Q&A, and we'll try our level best to answer those before the end of the call. I can run over for a few minutes, and those questions we don't answer on the call, we'll reply to you directly after the call. So this is one from Chris. I'm not going to mention your surname, but Chris, hello. Very good question from Chris, who I know works at one of the language agencies out there. And Chris is basically saying, where does phrase fit into the agency and the vendor and the LSP ecosystem? Where does CaptionHub fit into that process? So, I mean, I can answer for CaptionHub. Many of the LSPs are our customers. And many of the very end clients that we serve in the enterprise space are served by those language agencies. And so it can vary. We can have those LSPs as clients, they can be partners. It'll be interesting. I imagine it's going to be quite similar for you over at Phrase, but it'd be sort of interesting to hear how you're sort of working with the vendor agency ecosystem.
Like CaptionHub, we have a lot of clients who are language service providers. Mm-hmm. So they're using Phrase to manage their own projects for their end clients. Interestingly, we have language service providers working with Phrase for their clients who are also Phrase customers. And in those cases, we do have some tools and features that allow for some additional optimization in that LSP and client relationship, to share assets, to collaborate more effectively and more quickly. So there's a lot of benefit to being on our platform as an LSP, but also as your end clientele, so that they have more mature requirements and they need to participate in the TMS with you. Lots of great things to talk about, and we would be happy to talk more about that later.
Yeah, excellent. And again, there are so many parallels here between Phrase and CaptionHub. Many of those points very much apply to CaptionHub in allowing the end clients to collaborate within the platform as well. I think at this point, let's move away from the slides and jump into the tech. And we've got a pre-prepared project here in CaptionHub. And so I think it'd be good just to illustrate for people who haven't seen CaptionHub and Phrase working previously, how that might happen. And so really, if we're looking at the overall workflow of transcribing multimedia, then translating it and then publishing those subtitles. We're very much in this middle phase at the moment. So we're talking about localization, we're talking about the translating element. So we've got some original captions. We want to move into translating. At this point, what I'm able to do is, within the languages that we've set as our default languages, our target languages that we want to translate into, I can now send these translations directly into Phrase, where we can use the Phrase capabilities. So is there anything here that I should be aware of doing, David, or should I just run and use the sort of basic templates?
I think if you want to have some fun, choose an existing project.
Yep.
Search for webcast.
Yeah.
And let's pick on French.
That's French. So let's create translation. Now, why don't I hand over?
Like it's starting to feel like we rehearsed this, James. I'm a little uncomfortable.
We haven't actually rehearsed this exact bit. So.
All right. We have here, we had Italian previously. We're pushing French through now. And James, I'm sorry, I started playing with the mouse before I think.
Yeah, no, do you want to take control there?
Yeah, go ahead and click through, and we have a direct link into Phrase. Now this takes us directly into the project, and we can do a deep dive on all the different moving pieces that are inside of Phrase that we can take a look at. We're getting some overview of where we are as far as progress, what target languages we're working on in this particular project. We can talk about cost analysis. We can talk about reusing previous assets. But I have here just a couple of jobs. There's my previously completed Italian job, and I'm leaving the jokes for time's sake. But I have here's the French that we just submitted. Now, normally, I'd be looking this as a localization manager, someone who needs to understand just the overview of what's happening, where are we as far as the progress, what kind of leverage are we getting. And you can see that I already have 67% of this content confirmed, even though we haven't done anything. We've just submitted the translation for, or the source content for translation.
And where's that 67% coming from? Is that your machine translation just operating in the background and then realizing that that's correct?
Very, very close, because it's confirmed, right? It is coming from translation memory. Right. Often confused with machine translation, because TM, MT, it's very easy to switch the two letters around. But translation memory is previously approved translations that we want to reuse. So if you think about an enterprise scale translation effort, captioning is going to be a piece of that. There's going to be other marketing content, print content, public-facing website content. All that can come through and share the same reusable assets across projects. So in this case, we have, just so happens, enough to reuse. And if I click through into the view that a linguist is going to see, so as a professional translator, as a language reviewer, I'm going to get a link directly to this, and I will be able to come in and work with the source captions here on the right, here, I'm sorry, on the left, and on the right is the translation. And you can see I've pre-populated. In some of these instances, it's because it has come from translation memory. And you can see very subtly here, yeah, this came from a TM, and I have a translation memory here with a specific name. These other things came from machine translation, and you can see that in this case, we've used Microsoft Translator. I want to talk about that in a moment, but just to call out that we're applying multiple kinds of technology here in this experience. So we have not just the workflow processing, but the reuse and the application of previously approved translation based on a set of rules. And these are all rules driven. When do we reuse things? When do we lock it? You might notice that there's a little lock here. So as a translator, I can say, yeah, I don't need to mess with this segment. I move on to the next one that needs to be approved and used. And when I'm done with that, I can say, okay, well, that looks good. And my French is terrible, so I'm not going to say yes or no. Just don't hit me in the comments on the language quality yet. But yeah, this is a confirmed segment. And I can go through and do the confirmation. I can make my changes, do my editing in these open segments, and move on. So we're seeing translation memory applied. And then we're also using machine translation for the things that haven't been. This was a choice, right? I could have said, let's leave it blank. Right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, and I could say, let me jump back, close out of here, and pop back over to CaptionHub. If I add in a language request and say existing project webcast, and this time I'm going to ask for Japanese. Okay, there we are. Japanese is in progress. Let's click that link and go back into Phrase. We see that we have an additional language request, a language job that come through. If I click through, I'm going to see something a little different. In this case, I have rules that set up, don't use machine translation. I don't have a translation memory that I trust yet. So just give the translator a blank slate. They're going to go from 0.
Yeah.
Okay. So all these things are definable inside of the translation management system.
And these are rules that you can start to build and develop and evolve over time. And I'm assuming at the very start for those customers coming into TMS sort of version 1 in their ecosystem, in their company, when they're faced with, you know, a number of different machine translations, plus having to start to develop term bases, I'm assuming there's a level of automation there that Phrase can offer out of the box in terms of machine translation accessibility, or which choice of machine translation it's offering.
100%. As a matter of fact, it's a little subtle here because a linguist doesn't need to see this in their face when they're working, but you see it says MT name. It says Phrase Translate brackets Microsoft Translator.
Yeah.
Phrase Translate is a part of our translation management system that will dynamically choose the most appropriate machine translation engine based off the content that's being submitted. So what language is the source? What language is the target? What's the domain of the content? So we do a quick analysis on that. And our own linguists, our customer linguists, provide us feedback on what machine translation engines are doing as far as quality. And if I just take a quick peek behind the curtain in the translation management system, I will see a link here on the left to Phrase Translate, which is where we define what machine translation engines do we want to have in play for that kind of capability. So you can see that we have the usual suspects, right? We also have our own home-built machine translation engine, which is hyper-focused on translation management system integration scenarios. So doing some extra things with translation memory, with glossary, to help make sure that the results are of the highest possible quality. And we can add additional engines to this. So if you are training your own machine translation engine and you're at that level of the maturity scale, you can put that in. But if you're just getting started, it can be really overwhelming to say, oh gosh, you know, Google Translate is okay for English to Spanish, but not German to Japanese.
Yeah, I mean, where do I start, and how do I tell somebody else in my organization that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to DeepL? Is DeepL better in German for this particular? So there's got to be some guidance there, and it's interesting. Yeah.
So we can very easily get you past that initial analysis paralysis and the time and expense of doing your own analysis of these different engines and get started. And as you start to develop your own assets, as you start to develop your own opinions and preferences as an organization, you can say, yeah, well, we'll tweak this and manage this and adjust it for the particular things that we're ready to manage and adjust for. Just to real quick so that we see something come back to CaptionHub, I'm going to quickly pretend and accept this job. And in reality, a linguist would go through, make sure everything is appropriate in the right voice, in the right language. I'm just going to say, you know what, this is a webcast. I'm going to complete the job and say that we are done for now. I can close out a phrase, move on, and come back here to the French submission, and you can see that, hey, import, it's ready to go. Nice. So without having to do extra work. Yeah. You know, for people who are just getting started or have very manual processes, you understand the dance that has to happen where I've got content in one system, I then have to export it into a shared format, submit it somehow, probably through email, get the work done, it comes back in an email, I have to re-import. All that work is done. So
and we've used CaptionHub Phrase, underlying MTs, underlying term basis. There's lots of technologies working in orchestration there to give you very seamless workflow. David, I'm just going to pause very quickly because we're at time in the webinar. We've seen a really good workflow there, and we've got a whole bunch of questions going through. Just a time check for everybody on the webinar. David, are you okay to go over by a few more minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. We both got our coffees. There's just a few questions coming through here. For those, we'll save the questions for the end. For those people who need to leave very quickly, there's just a couple of other shout outs that we wanted to do, which I'm just going to drop back into the slides for. And so really exciting, just talking about the sort of linguist capability. David, over to you on this one. Quick shout out on phrase analytics.
There are some default capabilities from an analytics perspective inside of Phrase to be able to show you how you're doing from a localization program perspective, your costs, your turnaround times, your language pairs, basic quality information. We also have introduced this week advanced analytics. So if you need to do your own custom reporting without going so far as integrating and getting a Snowflake connector and pulling it into your own data warehouse, you can define your own reporting on your own parameters and really get that visibility that you need to show your stakeholders what's happening inside your localization program. So it's another level and ability to take control and have that insight into the process.
That's so exciting, and this absolutely wasn't planned, by the way, but it just so happens that we must be thinking on the same wavelength here as organizations. We're clearly just operating in the same space and moving up that enterprise localization capability. Analytics are just so important, where you've got the AI but the linguistic capability working next to it. We're also just launching our own analytics platform for those out of the box dashboards, but also the ability to build and customize your own reports. So between Phrase and CaptionHub there, you're going to have the analytics, the data that you need to really move your program on and accelerate your localization. Let's spend a couple of minutes on the Q&A. For those of you that have to leave, we will be recording this. You will receive a recording of it, and email addresses are here. So please do feel free to reach out to myself and also to David. And huge thanks, David, for joining. It's been really exciting. We could talk for another hour quite easily, and I'm sure we will at some point. Let's answer some of these questions. So we have Dan, can caption character limits be set within the Phrase integration, and where would that be? And so, so we can set the caption limits originally in CaptionHub, and then those are all obeyed once the captions are passed through to Phrase. I don't think there's anything more to add there from my side. David, any other comments from you on the Phrase side there?
Nothing dramatic, and someone sharp may have noticed that I blew past some of those limits in the translation process. It is actually captured in quality metrics on our side, so there will be a way for the linguist and localization managers, content reviewers to be able to say on the Phrase side, hey, wait a minute, the source said, X number of characters, and we're past that here. We need to make an adjustment, and we can collaborate on that. So yeah, we get that information from CaptionHub, and there will be multiple checks between CaptionHub and Phrase to make sure that lengths are dealt with appropriately.
Excellent. One from Ivana. Hey Ivana, is there in-context review available in the target language? So I think that's a question for within Phrase there. David, one for you.
Yeah, there's a question for us, and today the answer is no, not as yet. Obviously, that is a desirable thing to have. Caption translation is a tricky business. We're talking about machine translation, but honestly, you've got a lot of decisions to make as a translator about length, fitting on the screen. So in context is really, really important, and that is the maximum I can say about it today.
Yeah, and there are, what you're able to see at the moment within Phrase in relation to CaptionHub is context notes. So you do have some ability to go back and preview the video based on where you are within phrase and where you sit within captions, but certainly more to come there. So opportunity for improving there. An anonymous question here. I'm going to read it without any sort of forewarning. So when it comes to using MT for subs in phrase, does the engine understand the segment before it's typically linked? Okay, so we're talking about sort of breaking down. We do in CaptionHub, by the way, run full sentence level translation through our MT as well. So how is that working in a similar way on your side? If you crack that sentence level translation, context level translation?
Some of that, specifically because we're talking about machine translation, there are going to be various answers depending on which machine translation engine is being invoked.
Right.
So yes, obviously taking as much context as possible is going to give you the best results, especially now that every major engine is switched to neural translation techniques, and we're starting to explore LLM, and there's another 45 minutes of conversation there. So the short answer is yes, when available. We'll be able to have prior and subsequent segments be a part of that context. But just to know, that's not always the case with every MT engine on the market.
Awesome. Great answer there. I think we're 7 minutes over. Probably have to let people go back to their day jobs. People are still on the call, so thank you so much to everybody that has joined today and stayed all the way through to the very end. Huge thanks, David, to you so much for joining and taking us through phrase and talking about localization. Let's do another one. But yeah, from me, thank you very much.
James, thank you. And thanks everyone who was able to participate today.
Awesome. We'll be sharing the recording, we'll be sharing the slides, but that's it for today. We'll also